All right, we're at chapter 5 in Humanity by Peoples. And this chapter is about field work. And as I mentioned earlier, field work was developed especially by the historical particularist like Franz Boas and his disciple or student Margaret Mead. And the idea behind field work is, and this makes so much sense, and this is how science is supposed to work, where you go out and you observe the world or people or cultures, then you come back and you form your hypothesis. You don't make your hypothesis first and then try to go out and corroborate it. First, you observe the world, and then you try to come up with ideas. Why are things occurring the way they're occurring? And then you form tests to figure out if your hypothesis is true or not. Then you can go out and test that with the cultures that you're observing. And so field work becomes really crucial keeping cultural anthropology a science, even though, like I said, it's considered a soft science as opposed to the hard sciences like chemistry and biology, geology. But being a science, it needs to have sort of that professional aloofness or detachment where you have to kind of check your own biases and presuppositions at the door if you hope to have an untainted, successful scientific experiment. So first you start by observing, then after you've made observations, you come up with hypotheses, which is like an educated guess of why things are happening the way they are. Then you test that hypothesis. If your test is refuted, you go back and you create a new hypothesis, and then you test that. And you keep going through that process until your hypothesis is confirmed. If your hypothesis is confirmed, you strengthen it to a theory. Then you go through the same process. You test the theory. If the test is refuted, you go back and you rework your theory. And you keep doing that until the theory is confirmed 100% of the time, and that's how we get a scientific fact. Now, theoretically, there are no scientific facts. Even though we have things called like the first and second laws of thermodynamics, those are still just really strong theories. Even gravity is just a theory. And I don't mean to belittle it by saying just a theory, but it's not, we don't know that it will hold true tomorrow. Things could change tomorrow. But as far as we know today, gravity holds strong, and I would not test that theory by stepping off a bridge or a building. I mean, it's a very strong theory. It's not just like someone's guess or opinion, right? Chances are things are going to fall if you drop them on planet Earth at this time in history. Okay, so field work becomes the opportunity for anthropologists to go out and actually observe, form hypotheses or theories, and then test them, and then present their findings into the academic community. All right, so this is your writing, that 10-page paper you're going to do for me, and if you didn't get the memo, the culture fair is on. So because of the whole COVID thing, I'm not going to have you going out researching other cultures or people groups, but I do still want you to research online, or if you know people, you could do virtual interviews, but you're going to, with groups of 4 or 5, you're going to host one of the booths for the culture fair, which is, I think I said November 16th. Is that right?
Hey, Professor, I have a question.
Yes, November 16th at 10.
I have a question.
Yes.
What about if for other classes we're also required to do a booth for that class as well?
You can flip back and forth.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, check with your other teacher, but I'm fine with you multi-boothing.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to do one with Dr. Ellenwell.
Good.
So I just wanted to clarify, make sure that it would be okay to be going back and forth.
Okay. Yeah, it's fine with me. So.
Okay.
All right. So this is ethnographic research, and it's a collection of cultural data from living individuals. And so you can do this through interviewing, and this you could do online. or through participant observation. That is what I really wanted you to do, but because of the COVID, I just don't think, if I was a group, I wouldn't want strangers I didn't know coming in and doing interviews, and you don't know the people and where they stand on mask and social distancing and all that. So let's just, for at least this semester, let's just focus. We'll swap that out for the culture fair. I had already swapped out the culture fair for discussion boards, but so now we're going to swap out the, we're going to put the culture fair back in and take out the field work project, although you'll still be writing the paper. And now instead of presenting in class, I think I'm just going to have you present. Well, I still might have you present in class. I'm not sure, but definitely you're going to be hosting a booth and writing the 10-page paper. All right. Now, participant observation is normally, like I mentioned, where you actually go into a people group, you try to learn their language, you try to find a role in their society, because you want to learn from the inside out what they actually believe, not coming from the outside trying to understand, but trying to get inside and then explaining the culture from the inside out. Now, there are potential problems with field work, and this is very important. And so I hope the people who aren't here today will watch this recording. First problem, stereotyping. And remember, stereotyping is a two-way street. You're going to naturally have stereotypes about the people group you're studying or engaging, but they're going to probably have stereotypes about you as well. And so you're both going to have to overcome stereotypes to make this work. And that's part of my hope in this culture fair fieldwork project, is that you help us get past the stereotypes and to see more nuanced shades of the culture. Now, obviously we have stereotypes because there's truisms to them, like they can be generally true or often true, but I want to get past that into like really getting to meet and understand where different cultures are coming from, past the stereotypes, past the surfacey stuff. Okay, next is you have to develop a role and rapport with the group you're entering in. I told you about my missionary friends. For them to be in the tribe, they had to be adopted because the tribe didn't want outside people. And the way to solve that problem was simply to adopt the missionaries, and they became part of the tribe. But because they were already married, they had to be adopted by different clans. And so that, by being adopted by different clans, that immediately gave them certain status and roles and protections, rights, privileges, and duties being in that role in the clans. Okay, so you're going to have to figure out your role in the people group that you're entering into. And chances are it's probably going to be a very low role. For one thing, you don't speak their language very well. You don't understand their customs. You're like a child. You don't understand proper etiquette or rules of behavior. So chances are you're going to be low. Now, the reverse can happen as well. And this has really troubled me on different mission trips and outings I've done and cross-cultural teaching over the years, is often Americans are treated with special privilege and status, and there's simply an assumption, if you're from America, you're rich, you're intelligent, and you're educated. And it's very difficult sometimes for me to try to explain to people in places I've traveled that just because I'm from America does not mean I'm rich or I'm these other things you assume about me. And so you're going to have to deal with that as well. And sometimes simply by being a white, older male, I get status beyond what I deserve simply because of the way their culture views certain races, certain genders, the privilege of age, the privilege of education, etc. It's part of the reason I've been hesitant to do a missions trip to Africa, because of a lot of the stories my friends have told me of people who've come back, is where they'll bring in the teacher or the visiting missionary or guest lecturer, but they'll give him the choice food, right? I mean, they might even let their family go hungry for that night so that they can feast you, or they'll give you the best bed or the best chair, and you're always being elevated and put on kind of like a pedestal. And that does not work for me. I would be so uncomfortable being treated like that, and I couldn't do it. I could not eat knowing other people were going hungry to please me. And I get that that's part of the culture, but just because something's part of the culture, it's not part of my culture. And that's something you're going to have to navigate if you're doing cross-cultural ministry, right? And how much are you willing to put up with? Now that's simple, right? And that's positive. I'm just don't want to be lavished upon. But what if the culture was misogynistic? What if it believed raping pubescent women was just part of the norm? Well, I would have a real problem just acting like everything was okay and it's another day in the village or the town. I mean, I wouldn't be able to function knowing that kind of stuff was going on in between my teaching times. Does that make sense? And so it's something you have to become aware of and prepare for. I'm not saying you can't do cross-cultural teaching, but I think I would have to incorporate that. Maybe I would accept their praises and their exaltation to begin with, but then as part of my teaching would be to show them that I am not over you, I'm not above you, we're all made in the image of God, we're all God's servants, you're my brothers and sisters. And so it could be very positive, but you can imagine how shocking that would be to have a foreigner come in and then challenge you on your basic norms of how to treat a guest. And so these are some of the potential problems you're going to have to navigate and deal with coming into a group that is not your own. The next potential problem is you need to make sure you're identifying and consulting people who actually are being sincere with you and know what they're talking about. One of my favorite anthropological stories was this anthropologist going in to study, I'm just going to say the Yanomamo tribe again, because I think that's who it was, in the Amazon rainforest. And he took in all his own food, own supplies. He lived in his own little tent outside of the main village, and they understood why he was there and all that. They thought he was a curiosity, but this culture believed that anything unattended was up for grabs, and it was public property. And this is similar of a lot of tribal or nomadic groups where everyone basically has the same stuff. So it's not like one person has all this hoarded wealth and other people have nothing. You all basically have the same tools, the same bedding, the same houses, the same clothes. So there's really no point in taking from someone else because they have the same thing you have already anyways. Well, this anthropologist, of course, has all sorts of things that they don't have. Like the food he eats is not like their food, but he didn't want to share his food because he brought enough food for him. And so but see, they're a very hospitable culture. If he waltzed into their village, they would all want to feed him, right? And share what they had as a group. But then they would show up at his house, like the village or all the men in the village, and expect him to reciprocate. And they were eyeing his jars of peanut butter he had on his shelf. And they were like, hey, you have food. Why don't you share your food with us? We shared your food with you. And so this anthropologist, he would make up tall tales about what kind of food it was to try to dissuade them from wanting it. And he said, oh yeah, he said, that's a specialty from my country. It comes from the poop of a small rodent. And they're like, you eat poop? And he's like, yeah, this is a jar full of rodent poop. And so none of the people in the village wanted to eat his peanut butter. And he had like a can of Vienna sausages. And you can imagine the story he told him about where those things came from. And so he had this weird relationship going with these villagers. Well, one day they, this trade boat had come up the river, and the villagers had let their canoes be in disrepair. but they wanted to paddle out so that they could trade with this boat coming up the Amazon. And the anthropologist's boat, he had paid the tribe people, the men, to make him this beautiful canoe with planks and all of this inside of it. And what the villagers did was they stripped his canoe to repair their own so they could paddle out to the boat. Well, he was outraged that they would do this. He paid good money in good faith, and now they dismantled his boat to repair their own. Well, he was finally able to make it out in his now leaking canoe to the trade boat on the river, and all the other villagers' rafts were tied up to this trade boat. And he took out his machete and he just whacked the lines of all the other villagers' boats, so they went floating down the river. And they were angry to the point where they were going to kill him. And the chief was also on the boat. And he was like, wait a second, what's going on? He's like, why did you do that? And he goes, because, and he explained, I paid them to build my canoe, and then they stripped it to fix their canoe. So that's all my wood I let float down the river. It doesn't even belong to them. And when the chief heard that, he just laughed. And he was just like, you all just got what you deserved. And he spared the anthropologist's life. But these are kind of scenarios you have to think about when you come in to a different people group. You have to think they may have very different ideas about private property, ownership, hospitality, what's proper, what's improper, etc. What this anthropologist was trying to study, though, was genealogy and lineages of these tribal groups. What made it so difficult was a taboo in this culture was you do not speak the name of the dead. And so here's this poor American anthropologist trying to do field work and study on a topic that is culturally taboo to even talk about. And I don't know the religious reasons behind why you don't name the dead. Maybe you're afraid you're going to call them or summon them or something like that. I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, they weren't supposed to say the name of the dead. So you can imagine that people would have really elaborate names, like third left tail feather of the monkey eagle might be somebody's name, because chances are you're not going to say all those words together in a sentence, because you don't want to end up with a lot of words in your language that you can't say because they're the names of your dead ancestors. So they would make these really precise names. And one night he had a breakthrough around the campfire. One of the natives couldn't take being badgered anymore. And he said, I'm not going to tell you the name of my dead relatives, but I'll tell you the name of that guy's dead relatives. And he just started telling him his dead mother's name, his dead grandmother's name. And the anthropologist was just overjoyed. And he's making his charts and he's making his family trees. And then that person whose ancestors got named in retaliation began to tell the names of other people's dead ancestors. And by the end of the evening, this anthropologist had the complete family tree filled out for this tribe. But he realized, because this was an exogamous tribe, and we'll get to that when we get to marriage, but exogamous means you have to marry outside of your tribe. And it makes sense, right? To avoid incest, inbreeding, you want to get a mate from another village or tribe. So he realized they had a cousin or sister tribe where they would swap mates back and forth. Young people would get their spouses from this other tribe. He realized he had to go interview them if he wanted to complete the genealogy of the tribe he was studying, because that was the other part of it. And so he goes to the other tribe and he gives his request to the chieftain and the shaman. And they're like, oh no, because they had a similar culture. They're like, we can't give you those names. It's taboo. And he said, well, I got the names from the other tribe. And they're like, really? They told you their dead ancestor's name? And they didn't believe him. They said, okay, what was the chief's dead mother's name? And he goes, Ukalakawela. And the chief and the shaman just burst into laughter. They say that again. And he goes, Ukalakawela. And they just burst into belly laughs. And the anthropologist said, why are you laughing? And they're like, that's not the chief's dead mother's name. You just said in our language, monkey that eats vulture poop. And so the big joke was, the night he thought he was getting all the names of the ancestors, the whole tribe was just having him on by making up obscene names of other people's in the tribe's dead relatives. And so they just gave him a list of made up, bogus, obscene names that he thought he had now had this whole genealogy. So you have to be very careful who you're picking as a source. Do they know what they're talking about, and are they reliable? Like, think about maybe an anthropology student from San Diego State wanted to study us at San Diego Christian College. Well, if you're just a first-year freshman here and they're interviewing you versus interviewing someone like Lundy Karstensen, who's been here, I think, 35 years, you're going to get very different information about the norms, values, culture of this school, right? So you want to think about, who are you interviewing? How reliable do you think they are? And are they being honest and upright with you? Or are they just taking you for a proverbial anthropological ride? Any questions or comments on that? One more thing I want to tell you, and this is my strong exhortation and word of caution, is you have to be very sensitive when interviewing other people groups, especially if the people you're interviewing are minors. And I just want to flat out say, do not interview a minor without the parents' permission. And I would say we actually have a form for this at the school. So if you're going to be interviewing any minors, you have to get permission. You have to go through the process. You have to fill out a form, because we could actually be sued, shut down, etc., if things went poorly. And part of it's our times, but think about it. How would you feel if someone from state or UCSD got your kids or your little brother or sister alone and was asking them all sorts of really personal or intimate questions about your family or your beliefs? That might make you really uncomfortable. So you need to, especially if interviewing a minor, to get permission. I want to tell you one, this was right before I got this class, and normally they would have like missionaries on furlough teach the cultural anthropology and world religions class, but I finally was able to get it from them. But we had the assignment for education majors, they had to do their field work in an elementary school setting because that's where they were going to work, and it had to do with the state licensing. So I let my other students interview whoever, but my education majors had to do their field work in the context of the classroom. Well, this was, one of my students got permission to interview a student in the El Cajon Valley School District, and they picked a young Rastafarian boy, and he's probably in middle school, maybe elementary school. And the first thing our sweet, young, white, conservative Christian college student asked this young Rastafarian to do is to take off his TN, or his head covering, because he had all his dreads tucked up under his hat. But see, from the culture your previous classmate came from, it was rude to wear hats in like a formal setting or interview. What she didn't understand was, in his culture, asking him to take off his hat, she might as well ask him to take off his pants, because that was something they kept private. It was very important to their religion. It wasn't something that they were just flashing around. It wasn't a fashion statement, but it was a private, sacred thing. And so that poor little boy, when he went home traumatized by this white woman from some Christian school in El Cajon at the time, you can imagine, her parents called the NAACP. There were protests outside our school. And the irony is, the whole point of this project is to try to help us get over stereotypes, get over racism, get over prejudice, bigotry, to see people how they actually are. And instead, the reverse happened, where it just was this raw misunderstanding due to lack of education understanding. So you really need to do some research about the people you're going to be studying or interviewing, so you're not making those foibles. And if you run it by me first, I mean, I certainly don't know about every culture or subculture, but I know about a lot of them. I could save you and me and the school a lot of grief. But for that reason, I really prefer, unless for whatever reason you really need to study minors, I would just say it's not worth the pitfalls and the hassles to do it. So try to interview adults. But even then, a good thing to ask yourself is, how comfortable would I be if someone was asking me the types of questions that I want to ask them? And like I said, please run it by me. I'd be more than happy to help you or help you come up with interview questions. We just want to be respectful, and the end goal is to bring understanding and hopefully even appreciation of the other, rather than a fear of or a misunderstanding, let alone we don't want to insult the people we're studying. And remember, they're people. We're not studying minerals or fruit or animals. These are human beings. So don't treat them as such. Don't objectify them. Remember, these are subjective individuals. Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Ethno history. This is a study of culture through written records. And so you may have to do a lot of this, but fortunately, especially with access to the internet and online libraries and fieldwork notes, you'll be able to do so much of this from the comfort of your own home or laptop. Cross-cultural comparisons. We've had over 1,200 societies that have been recorded and ethnographies written about. And if you're going to do cross-cultural comparisons, once again, you come up with your hypothesis. You choose a sample societies to compare. Okay, start again. So when you're doing cross-cultural comparisons, comparing one culture to one or more others, you formulate your hypothesis, what you want to test. Like you could say, in societies that have witchcraft, is there a greater rate of homicide? That may be the question you want to compare. And so you would then select different animistic or witchcraft societies that you were going to evaluate, and you were going to look at the demographics and the numbers of how many people were killed. You also need to be able to classify and group your ethnologies. So that might be like these were in the 1800s. This is the 19th century. This is 21st century. And then finally, the goal is to look for patterns and associations. You don't want to impose patterns, but you want to try to observe, are there certain patterns happening in certain types of societies that we can make comparisons about? All right. Another potential problem is trying to understand the whole by comparing dissected parts. Like you could look at their religious beliefs, but you may completely miss out on their technology. Or you might look at the food they eat, but completely miss out the religious significance of their dance and their poetry. And so I love the holistic approach. The more you can learn about the culture, and it's more interesting for us too, or your booth, if you can show their music, if you can show their dance, if you can show their art, their poetry, their religion, their politics, their economics, their marriage rituals, all of that gives us all these different flavors and nuances of who this group is. And that's what I want you to shoot for. A controlled historical comparison. Changes which occur over periods of time help to define cultural patterns. So for example, in human history, there was a time period, especially in the Mediterranean, where cultures were dominated by matriarchies. And a matriarchy is where women are in control of the society at large, but even often down to the head of the household is a woman. So when a man marries a woman, they take the woman's name or the clan name of the woman, and the children are seen under the woman's clan. Later, however, these invading patriarchal cultures came in where they were male dominated, and as they took over, they imposed that onto the cultures in which they conquered. And so we see these patterns of change taking place over time, going from a female-dominated cultures to male-dominated cultures. And now 21st century America, we see a really strong fight for egalitarian-based cultures, where it's not dominated by men or women, even though America is still coming much more from a patriarchal rather than a matriarchal background. Okay, well, that concludes chapter 5, which is wonderful. And so what I'm going to do for Thursday's class, I'm going to put up, I'm hoping I can find, I'm going to show you a documentary called Jesus Camp. Have any of you ever seen Jesus Camp? All right. I'm showing you this for a couple different reasons. For one, it's very cathartic for me because I grew up kind of in this sort of environment. Not so much, they're more charismatic than my group was, but the other stuff, I just have flashbacks the whole time I watch this movie. So it's about evangelicals enculturating or indoctrinating their children. And it's made by two women. I won't tell you anything more about them right now. But I don't just want you to watch this as a movie. I want you to watch it as an anthropologist and think about how good a job did they do about being participant observers. I mean, these people let them into their homes, into their churches, into their children's dorm rooms at camp, for heaven's sakes. I mean, they gave these people crazy access to their children. And the movie's, you know, a couple hours long, hour and a half long, but I'm sure they shot hundreds of hours of film. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about, is there a message the filmmakers are trying to convey to you? They do a really good job about not putting commentary on it, but like you saw with Baraka, you can be really preachy without using words. And a lot of that can do with the editing, with the music choice, which clips you decide to show, which ones you decide not to show. So what kind of portrait are they painting of evangelicals? And so I want you to use this to kind of get ideas for your own projects, but also to evaluate someone else's field work. And how would you evaluate them? Did you think they were fair? Did you think they really let these people express what they believed? Or do you feel they kind of manipulated it to kind of get across their own agenda? And if so, what was that agenda? And I'll probably make a discussion board post for that, but I'll give you a couple days. So for Thursday and Tuesday, I'll let those be film days. And then I think for a week from today is when I'll have the midterm up for sure. And I would normally give you a class day to do the test, so I think I might do that as well. And then we'll start in on chapter 6 2 weeks from now. How's that sound? Good? All right. Thanks, you guys.